The evening sky over the small city of Brandon, Manitoba, began to bruise, signaling rain was imminent. The sounds of traffic mixed with the shouts of food truck operators rushing to close their windows. In the midst of the bustle, a girl in jeans and a hoodie walked quickly along the pavement, carrying a worn-out backpack, slightly torn at the corner. Her name was Sophie Kovalchuk, a grade 11 student at Brandon Collegiate. She was only 17, but the weight on her shoulders was far heavier than that of her peers. Her father had died a year ago in a scaffolding accident at a job site, and her mother worked as a seamstress from their small apartment. Sophie often helped her mother after school by selling homemade butter tarts near the bus depot. That afternoon, the rain came suddenly. Sophie ran, crossing the street, trying to find shelter. She had just covered her bag with a plastic sheet, when she heard a sharp whistle from the direction of the community police office on the corner. "Hey, you! Stop!" someone shouted from inside. Sophie turned. A man in a police uniform emerged. He was tall and broad, with a hard face and a thick mustache covering his lip. His name was Constable Mark Dixon. He was known in the area as an aggressive cop who liked looking for trouble. Many locals avoided him because he was known for shaking people down for fines on the street. "What is it, officer?" Sophie asked politely. Constable Dixon glanced at his clipboard, then at the old scooter parked on the curb nearby. "Whose scooter is that?" he asked sharply. "It's mine, sir." "It was my dad's. I'm just trying to get home." "It's raining." The officer stroked his chin. "This thing's registration is expired, eh? Where's your insurance?" Sophie grew nervous. She knew the registration had lapsed, but her family genuinely didn't have the money to renew it. "I'm sorry, officer. I haven't had a chance to renew. But as soon as my mom has the money." "I can't cut you a break," Dixon said harshly. "This is a violation. You know the rules, right? I have to impound the scooter." "Officer, please don't. I just want to go home." "I can sort it out tomorrow," she pleaded, her voice nearly lost in the downpour. Constable Dixon stared at her for a long moment. "If you want me to forget I saw this, you'll need to pay the fine. $200 should cover it." Sophie stared at the officer, her eyes wide. $200, sir? I don't have that kind of money. I only have $5 for the bus." The officer smirked. "Well, if you can't pay, I'm taking the scooter. Or..." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "You come inside the office with me. We can talk about it." Sophie took a step back, her instincts screaming. "What do you mean, sir?" Dixon chuckled softly. "Don't play dumb. If you can help me out a little tonight, maybe I can help you out, too." Sophie's face went pale. She knew exactly what he was implying, and her heart began to hammer. She tried to turn and leave, but Constable Dixon's hand was faster. He grabbed her wrist roughly. "Sir, let go. I want to go home," she yelled, terrified. "Quiet," Dixon snapped. "Are you resisting an officer?" A few people saw the incident from a distance, but with the heavy rain and the dim light of the office, no one dared to approach. They all knew Constable Dixon's reputation. Anyone who challenged him usually ended up in more trouble inside the office. The dim fluorescent light flickered. Sophie was pulled inside, her body trembling. Dixon threw his rain slicker onto a chair and stared at the girl with sharp eyes. "Do you want me to write you up, or do you want this to be quick?" His voice was heavy. "I didn't do anything wrong, sir," Sophie whispered. Dixon walked closer, slapping the desk. "Don't give me excuses. You failed to register, you're resisting an officer, and you're being disrespectful. That's enough reason for me to hold you overnight." Tears began to fall down Sophie's cheeks. She knew if she fought back, her fate might be worse. But she wouldn't give in just like that. I'm begging you, sir. Give me 2 days. I promise I'll pay the registration. The officer just laughed. Promises don't buy gas, kid. Suddenly, he kicked a chair, sending it clattering to the floor, making Sophie jump. He snarled, grabbing the collar of her hoodie. You think I'm kidding? Sophie's sobs grew louder. Please, sir, don't be rough. But there was no mercy in the man's eyes. He pushed Sophie against the wall with a threatening tone. You need to learn your place. This world is tough. If you don't have money, don't act all high and mighty with me. A few minutes later, the sound of footsteps was heard outside. A young man in a skip-the-dishes jacket ran towards the office. Officer! Officer Dixon, he shouted. Dixon instantly released his grip on Sophie and turned. What? There's a resident asking for help down by the Tim Hortons. Said there was a minor fender bender, a car slid into the ditch. Dixon rolled his eyes, annoyed. Damn it. Interrupting me while I'm working. He grabbed his hat and stepped outside, still glaring at Sophie coldly. You wait here. Don't go anywhere. If you run, I'll come to your house. As soon as he left, Sophie collapsed onto the floor, her body weak. She hugged her backpack tightly, trying to stifle her sobs. Her mind was a mess of fear and anger. She knew if that man returned, she didn't know what would happen. Without thinking, she ran out of the office into the torrential rain. Her old scooter was still there, he'd taken the keys. She had no choice but to leave it. Soaked to the bone, she walked the 2 kilometers home along the dark streets. In their small apartment on the edge of town, her mother, Elena, was waiting anxiously. Sophie. Why are you so late? You're soaking wet. Sophie didn't answer right away. She just hugged her mother tightly and cried her heart out. It took several minutes before she could tell her story. As soon as she heard it, Elena's face flushed with anger. My God! What kind of police officer is that? No compassion at all. But behind her anger, there was fear. They knew how hard it was to fight the police in a town like this. One wrong move, and their lives could become even harder. Elena finally took a deep breath. It's okay, sweetheart. Tomorrow, I'm going to the police station. I'll speak to them calmly. Maybe there are still some honest cops. Sophie nodded slowly, but in her heart, the trauma was already seared in. She couldn't forget Dixon's threatening gaze. That night, the rain didn't stop. The wind blew the worn curtain in their small room. Sophie lay awake, staring at the leaking ceiling as it dripped slowly. She didn't know that from that night on, her life would change completely, that who she really was, and who her family used to be, would soon be revealed in the most unexpected way. Meanwhile, in another place, in a large house in Winnipeg, a high-ranking officer in the Canadian Armed Forces opened a file on his desk. His name was Colonel Robert Pritchard. In his hand was an old photograph of a little girl with long hair, and on the back of the photo, one name was written, Sophie Kovalchuk. He stared at the photo for a long time, then spoke quietly to his aide, "Find this girl. I believe she's grown up by now. And she is my granddaughter." The rain stopped just before dawn. At the quiet police office, Constable Dixon returned, his uniform damp. He swore quietly, then saw Sophie's old scooter still parked there. He smiled slyly. Tomorrow morning, if that kid shows up, I'll make sure she never forgets who's in charge around here, he muttered, lighting a cigarette. He had no idea that his actions that night would be the beginning of his own downfall. That morning, the sun had just risen over the horizon, but the air in Sophie's apartment felt heavy. Elena sat in the living room, her eyes swollen. Sophie prepared her school clothes with trembling hands. She didn't want to go to school, but her mother insisted. "Don't let people like him make you afraid," Elena said softly. "We did nothing wrong." Sophie nodded slowly, though her heart was still unsettled. She could still feel the officer's rough hand on her wrist, and the smell of cigarettes from his uniform that stung her nose. Every time she remembered, her heart pounded. But she knew she had to keep going. Outside, the streets were getting busy. Schoolchildren passed by, laughing cheerfully, as if the world had no problems. Sophie could only watch them from a distance, feeling alienated from that simple happiness. At the end of the street, a middle-aged man stood near a coffee shop. He wore a brown jacket and a cap. His gaze followed Sophie's steps silently. In his hand was a small photo, the same one Colonel Pritchard had held the night before. The man was Sergeant Danielou, Pritchard's aide, sent to find Sophie discreetly. "My God, it's really her," he murmured. He took a photo of Sophie from a distance and sent a text message. "Colonel, I've found her. She's in modest circumstances. I will observe for now." Colonel Pritchard, currently at the base, received the message. His stern face slowly softened. Finally, he said softly, "The grandchild I've been searching for." Meanwhile, at the city's police headquarters, the morning seemed ordinary. Several officers were busy filing reports, while Constable Dixon sat casually at a corner desk, sipping coffee and scrolling through his phone. On the screen was a message from a friend on another force. "Hey man, be careful. Heard there's an internal team making the rounds, checking for skimming." Dixon replied with a short laugh. "Let 'em. I'm clean. Besides, who's gonna dare open their mouth here?" he texted back, slipping the phone into his pocket. Suddenly, the office door opened. A woman entered, her face determined, wearing a blue hijab. She carried a yellow file folder. "Good morning, officer," Elena said politely. "I want to talk about my daughter, Sophie Kovalchuk. She said her scooter was impounded by one of your officers." The room suddenly went quiet. Dixon, sitting in the corner, turned, his expression changing instantly. He looked Elena up and down, then stood up with a cynical smile. "Oh, so you're the mother of that kid from yesterday," he said. "I already told her, the scooter was impounded for expired registration and resisting an officer." "My daughter did not resist," Elena countered immediately. "She's a good kid, officer. Even if she was wrong, she should have been given a ticket, not intimidated like that." Dixon narrowed his eyes. "Ma'am, watch your mouth. This is a police station, not the farmer's market. If you want to complain, bring proof. Don't just make accusations." Elena gripped her folder tightly. "I know you held her scooter and demanded $200. I don't have proof, but I won't stay silent." The tension in the room thickened. A few young officers present glanced at each other. They knew Dixon's reputation, but didn't dare speak. Only one, a young constable named Reno Dubois, looked uneasy. Dixon laughed coldly. "Shakedown money. Don't make up stories, ma'am. I'm a law enforcement officer. If you slander me, I can charge you." Elena's face turned pale, but she stared back without flinching. "Go ahead, officer. But I will also report this to the IIPU. If there's no justice here, maybe there still is somewhere else." Dixon suppressed his anger. "That's enough, ma'am. Get out before I detain you for interfering with a public servant." Elena looked down, holding back tears, then walked out with heavy steps. Reno, who had been silent the whole time, watched her go, his heart pounding. He knew Elena was telling the truth. He'd heard the rumors about Dixon squeezing money from poor residents. As soon as Elena left, Dixon approached Reno. "You see that? That's how these poor folks are. A little pressure and they cry, they threaten to report, but in the end, they shut up if we push back. Reno just gave a short reply, yes, sir. But inside, he thought something else. If this is allowed to continue, the law here will never be clean. At school, Sophie tried to calm herself. Her friends, especially Rachel, her best friend, tried to comfort her. Soph, if that cop was really rough with you, you have to tell the principal. Don't stay quiet. Sophie shook her head. No, Rach. I just want this to be over. I'm afraid of making things harder for my mom. But by the afternoon, news of the incident began to spread quietly among the students. Some had heard directly from residents near the police office. Others added to the story. Some even thought Sophie had been arrested for stealing the scooter. She kept her head down all day, ashamed and scared. When it was time to go home, Rachel held her hand. I'll walk you. Sophie smiled weakly. Thanks. But I want to stop by the police office first. I want to try and get the scooter. Rachel looked at her, worried. Alone? Yeah. I just want to try talking to him nicely. That afternoon, the sky turned gray again. At the same police office, Dixon was sitting, smoking, counting money from a small drawer. Sophie approached slowly, carrying a small envelope containing her mother's savings. Excuse me, officer, she said softly. Dixon turned and grinned. Oh, you came back. So, did you bring the money? Yes, sir. But it's only $100. Is that okay? I promise I'll get the rest next week. Dixon stood up, moving closer, staring at Sophie's face. You think this is a flea market? This isn't a negotiation. If you want your scooter back, you know how to pay. His gaze was the same as the night before. Dark and terrifying. Sophie took a step back. I brought the money, sir. Please don't try anything. Dixon laughed softly. Money that small is nothing. But you can still pay. Other ways. His hand reached out, trying to touch her chin. But suddenly, a firm voice came from the doorway. Take your hands off her, Dixon. Dixon froze. At the door stood Reno, his face grim, his phone in his hand. I've been recording this whole time. Every word you said is on this video. Dixon's face went white. You're crazy. You got a death wish. Reno stared at him coldly. I'm sick of the way you treat the poor people in this town. Dixon lunged forward, trying to grab the phone. A fierce scuffle broke out. Sophie screamed for help. Outside, several residents who happened to be passing by started to gather, hearing the commotion. Dixon, in a panic, punched Reno, knocking him down, then grabbed the phone and smashed it on the floor. But the residents had already entered, several recording with their own phones. Officer, why are you fighting? Someone shouted. In the chaos, Sophie ran outside, covering her face, crying. But she hadn't gone far when she saw someone waiting for her across the street. Sergeant Danielou, the man asked gently. Sophie Kovalchuk. Don't be afraid. I'm from Winnipeg. I'm here on behalf of your family. Sophie was stunned. My family. Danielou nodded. Your grandfather, Colonel Robert Pritchard, has been looking for you. He only recently found out you were his granddaughter. Sophie was frozen. The world seemed to stop for a second. She never knew her father was the son of a high-ranking officer. But why only now? Her voice was barely audible. It's a long story. But what matters is, from now on, you're not alone. We will help you and your mother. That night, news of the incident at the small police office began to spread through residents' Facebook groups and on TikTok. Reno's recording and footage from several witnesses circulated. The video clearly showed Constable Dixon's aggressive behavior and his attempt to extort money from Sophie. Comments flooded in. Finally, his behavior is exposed. Poor kid, still in high school. Hope she gets justice. The next day, a team from the Independent Investigation Unit, IIPU, arrived directly at the police station. Constable Dixon was called in for questioning. His face was tense, but he still tried to defend himself. "It was just a misunderstanding, sir. The kid was the one provoking me. However, all the evidence was too clear." Reno submitted the full recording from a backup device, and several residents also gave testimony. In a short time, the case became a major public issue in the region. At her home, Sophie sat with her mother and Sergeant Danielle Lau. On the table was an official letter with a Canadian Armed Forces letterhead, in the name of Colonel Robert Pritchard. It requested that Sophie and Mrs. Elena Kovalchuk come to Winnipeg to meet the family. Elena read the letter with tears streaming down her face. "All this time, I never knew my late husband was a colonel's son. He never told me." Danielle Lau smiled warmly. "He just wanted to live a simple life, ma'am. But the colonel regrets deeply that he never found his son before he passed." Sophie looked down, her heart a mix of emotions. She still couldn't believe that her ordinary, difficult life had suddenly intersected with a high-ranking person in the country. But behind the shock, one thing was certain. That dark night at the police office had changed everything. And for Constable Dixon, the shadow of his own actions was beginning to catch up. Slowly but surely. 3 days had passed since the incident at the police office, and the small city of Brandon was buzzing. The video of Constable Dixon bullying Sophie continued to circulate on social media and in community groups. Several local news outlets even ran articles titled, "Officer Accused of Extorting High School Student Under IIPU Investigation." For many, it was just a day's news. But for Dixon, it was the beginning of the end of his life. Inside an interrogation room at the headquarters, Dixon sat with a tense face. Across from him, an IIPU investigator looked at the report file with a flat expression. "Constable Mark Dixon," the investigator said slowly. "This report states that you demanded fine money from a resident named Sophie Kovalchuk, and even engaged in inappropriate conduct at the community office. Do you deny this?" Dixon tried a stiff smile. "It's all a misunderstanding, sir. The kid accused me without proof. That video is just a snippet, it doesn't show the whole thing." The investigator put the file down, staring at him sharply. "We have the full recording from Constable Dubois and several witnesses. You don't need to pretend. You know the consequences." Dixon's face turned pale. "Sir, I've been on the force for 12 years. I'm begging you, don't just throw me away. I have a family." "If you remembered your family, you shouldn't have disgraced this uniform," the investigator replied coldly. "We are sending this report to the chief. In the meantime, you are suspended from duty." Dixon slammed the table hard. "It's not fair, sir. Everyone here knows skimming is common. Why am I the only one taking the fall?" The room went silent. The investigator stared at him. "Because you got caught." The words hit like a hammer. Dixon fell silent, then looked down. He realized this was no longer a small matter. His reputation was ruined, and his career was almost certainly over. Meanwhile, at Sophie's small apartment, the atmosphere had turned brighter. Sergeant Danielle Lau arrived with a service vehicle. That day, he would take Sophie and Elena to Winnipeg to meet Colonel Pritchard. Sophie wore a simple blue dress. Her face still looked tired, but there was a flicker of new hope in her eyes. Her mother looked at her, her eyes glistening. "Your father would be so happy," Elena said softly. You finally get to meet your grandfather. The car drove past fields and small towns. Fresh air flowed through the slightly open window. Sophie looked out, watching the green expanse that felt like a new chapter in her life. After a 2-hour drive, they arrived at a large, white-painted house in the Tuxedo neighborhood of Winnipeg. The yard was vast, with a Canadian flag flying proudly out front. An older man in a collared shirt came out from the patio. Colonel Robert Pritchard. As soon as he saw Sophie get out of the car, he stopped. His eyes watered. He walked over slowly. Sophie, his voice trembled. You look just like your father when he was young. Sophie looked down respectfully, tears falling uncontrollably. I just found out, grandfather. Pritchard hugged her tightly. Forgive me, Cookham Cree for grandmother correction, he is the grandfather. Mishomis in Cree/Ojibwe, or just grandpa. Forgive me, grandpa. I was too late finding you. But from today, you will never lack for anything again. Elena bowed her head, moved. A warm atmosphere filled the yard. However, behind all the emotion, there was still a wound that hadn't truly healed in Sophie's heart, the shadow of the police office, and the threatening voice that still haunted her sleep. That evening, at the CAF base where Pritchard served as a senior advisor, a young officer brought him a report folder. Sir, here is the complete data on your granddaughter's case in Brandon. The IIPU has handled it. The officer, Constable Mark Dixon, is under review. Pritchard read it quickly, his face hardening. People like that don't deserve the uniform. I want to make sure he can't bully anyone else ever again. The officer nodded. Yes, sir. We've also coordinated with the Brandon Police Service for additional oversight. Pritchard looked out the window. Justice can't stop at a report. Make sure he faces the consequences. That night, Dixon sat alone in his cramped living room. The small service house now felt darker than usual. His wife, Maya, sat across from him, her face angry, her eyes swollen. So it's all true? Maya asked quietly. You demanded money from that high school girl. You even. Almost. Quiet. Dixon snapped. Where did you hear that? Everyone in the complex knows. The video of you is all over the internet. The kids at school are commenting, the neighbors are laughing at us. Don't you realize, Mark? Our son won't go to school because he's ashamed. Dixon looked down, silent. The sound of his son crying came from the bedroom. Maya stood up, grabbed a bag and said quietly, I don't know what you've become. But I can't live with someone who hurts other people's children. She walked out, leaving Dixon alone. Rain began to fall outside. Dixon sat in the old chair, staring at the empty floor, then hit the table with a trembling fist. This is all because of that kid, he mumbled. That kid ruined my life. But deep in his heart, something stirred. The guilt he had suppressed for so long began to surface. He remembered Sophie's face that night, her tears, her fear. For the first time, Dixon felt disgusted with himself. A few days later, the IIPU officially announced that Dixon was found guilty of gross misconduct. He was dismissed from the police service without honor. The news was broadcast in the local media and reshared in community groups. Arrogant officer officially fired. High school student victim receives special protection. The community cheered, relieved. But for Dixon, it was the end of everything. The service house had to be vacated. He sold his car and stayed at his brother's place on the outskirts of the city. No one wanted to talk to him. At the coffee shop, people just whispered when he passed. It's a shame, but he deserved it. Karma comes fast. Those words echoed in his head. One night, sitting on the porch with a bottle of water in his hand, Dixon stared at the empty street and murmured softly, I used to think money could buy everything. Now I know the price of peace is more expensive than anything I ever took." He took a deep breath, his eyes wet. "Maybe this is the punishment I deserve." On the other side, Sophie's life began to change. She and her mother were now living temporarily at Colonel Pritchard's home in Winnipeg. She was accepted into a top high school in the city, with her grandfather's help. But even though her life was improving, Sophie remained humble. One afternoon, she sat on the terrace watching the yard, accompanied by a cup of tea. Colonel Pritchard came and sat beside her. "I heard what happened to that officer. Dixon. He lost everything." Sophie was silent for a moment. "I know, Grandpa. I want to go back to Brandon for a day. There's something I need to do." The next day, Sophie returned to her old neighborhood. The streets felt different. She saw Dixon near the bus depot, not in a uniform, but in dirty work clothes, waiting with other men for day labor. He looked thin and tired. Sophie approached slowly. Dixon looked up, his eyes widening in shock when he saw who it was. He immediately looked away, ashamed. Sophie didn't say anything about the past. She didn't mention the scooter, or the $200. She was quiet for a moment. Sophie held out something from her bag, a sandwich and a coffee. "Here, sir. For your lunch." Dixon stared in confusion, then slowly accepted it. Tears fell silently from his eyes. You're still willing to help me? After everything I did?" Sophie smiled faintly. "I just don't want to add to my sins by hating. Life has already punished you enough." Dixon looked at her for a long time, then bowed his head deeply. "Thank you, kid. May God forgive me." Sophie looked at the sky, which was starting to turn orange, and walked away. Behind her, Dixon still stood with the sandwich in his hand, watching the back of the girl he once wanted to destroy, but who had instead taught him a lesson about humanity and forgiveness. In the car, Elena, who was waiting in the front seat, looked at her daughter in the rearview mirror. "Are you sure you've truly forgiven him, honey?" Sophie smiled small. "Yes, Mom. Because if I keep holding on to that hate, I'll never heal." Elena looked at the sky, tears falling slowly. "You truly are an amazing kid." The car drove slowly past the depot, which was beginning to empty. The sky turned a golden orange. And at the end of the road, the sun sank slowly, marking the end of one dark chapter in their lives, but not the end of everything. Because in Sophie's heart, one thing now grew strong: the belief that kindness always finds its way, even from the deepest wounds. That morning, the air at the RCMP detachment where Rena had once been assaulted felt heavy. Officers walked quickly, whispers heard among them. In the main briefing room, an internal hearing was underway. The superintendent presided, his face tense. In front of him sat three officers, Costello, Bennett, and Duncan, their faces now full of fear. In the corner of the room, Rena sat with a powerfully built man in civilian clothes. But his aura clearly showed the dignity of a soldier. He was Lieutenant Colonel Alain Tremblay, Rena's father, a CAF officer recently returned from an overseas deployment. His cold gaze pierced everyone in the room. The superintendent stood and saluted. "Good morning, Lieutenant Colonel. We have received the full report. We have also detained the three members who were proven to have committed violence and extortion against your daughter." Tremblay stared at the three of them for a long time. "Are you aware," he said, his voice calm but sharp, "that what you did not only stained your uniforms, but also destroyed the public's trust in law enforcement?" Costello looked down. "We made a mistake, sir. We just—" "A mistake?" Tremblay cut him off. "A mistake can never be an excuse for assaulting an innocent girl." Rena sat beside her father, gripping his hand tightly. She still looked traumatized, but there was a hint of relief in her eyes. For the first time, she felt safe. A few days later, the media began to report heavily on the case. Headlines on various portals read, RCMP officers assault teen, daughter of CAF officer. The public reacted strongly. Many were angry but also relieved that the truth had finally emerged. The hashtag Justice for Rena started trending. But Rena wasn't looking for sensationalism. She just wanted justice. With her father, she went to the Ministry of Children and Family Development, MCFD, and gave testimony so that similar cases wouldn't happen again. In a brief interview on local television, Rena said softly, "I just want everyone to know. Don't be afraid to fight injustice, even if you feel small." Her words touched many people. A few days later, her school held a small assembly. Friends and teachers welcomed her with warm hugs. Mrs. Sharma, the English teacher who had defended Rena, looked at her with teary eyes. "You went through something terrible, dear. But you stayed strong. That's what makes you extraordinary." Rena smiled. "I was just lucky, Mrs. Sharma. God still gave me a chance to keep living." Meanwhile, at the police headquarters, the three perpetrators were formally dismissed and faced criminal charges and prison time. The new superintendent even implemented strict policies to ensure no more extortion or violence against the community. "Rena's case has been a bitter lesson for all of us," he said at a press conference. Tremblay, the father, never sought revenge. He only demanded real reform within the regional police system. "Justice isn't about revenge," he told reporters. "It's about ensuring the same crime doesn't happen to someone else." Several months passed. Rena's physical wounds began to heal, but the trauma still surfaced occasionally. Some nights she would wake up from nightmares. But every time it happened, her father would sit beside her, hold her hand, and say gently, "You're safe now, honey. No one will ever hurt you again." Time moved on. Rena refocused on her studies. She became one of the top students at her school. She even wrote an essay titled, "Justice Doesn't Only Belong to the Strong." The essay won a national competition, and was published in the newspaper. Many didn't know the essay was written from her own life story. One afternoon, Rena stood in front of her mother's grave, who had passed away long ago. She brought a white lily and whispered softly, "Mom, I'm strong now. I'm not afraid anymore." The wind blew gently, as if answering her prayer. In the distance, the sun set slowly behind the trees, marking the end of the dark chapter in her life. Epilogue. Several years later, Rena became a law student at UBC. She often volunteered, helping victims of violence and injustice. In a seminar, she stood before hundreds of people and said, "I used to be just an ordinary student who was afraid to speak. But I'm here today because someone once showed me that silence means letting evil live on." We all have a responsibility to fight injustice, no matter how small. The audience gave a long-standing ovation. In the front row, Lieutenant Colonel Tremblay looked at his daughter with pride. He knew Rena's struggle wasn't just against the injustice that happened to her, but also against the fear within herself. And that was the end of the story. Not a gloomy end, but the beginning of a journey for a girl who transformed from a victim into a voice for many. Rena